tonight we're going to be talking about organizing, grassroots organizing, and the discussion is going to focus on Phillips 66 and the refineries. We're fortunate to have with us a Baykeeper attorney. His name's Ben Eichenberg, and I'll give it to him. Go ahead.
Yeah, like I said, it's fine to sit for your video stuff? Yeah. My name is Ben Eichenberg. I'm a staff attorney with San Francisco Baykeeper, and I am focused right now on the Phillips 66 Marine Terminal expansion. We just put together, I think, close to 20 pages of comments on that expansion, which I have a copy of here. I can check the pages. Yep, 20. And that's just the scoping, so we'll probably expand on a lot of those points for the draft EIR when that comes out. So I'm pretty focused on what the environmental impacts of that marine terminal expansion are going to be. And I think Nate asked me to come and talk a little bit about that and about what kinds of community organizing stuff might be helpful around that and what I've heard is going on. Baykeeper doesn't do a lot of grassroots organizing, protests, things like that necessarily. But right now with this marine terminal expansion, we're working with a couple other organizations and started looking more at some of those sorts of possibilities, just because that's the stage we're at right now. And if we want to get this terminal expansion stopped and everything that it stands for, which is sort of more oil refining in the Bay Area, which is exactly what Baykeeper, and I think all of you agree, is not what the Bay Area needs right now, and what the world needs right now, for that matter. Just a little context so you guys know where I'm coming from. I've been an environmental attorney for about 6 or 7 years, and before that I was an activist and did some organizing, but not a whole lot. My son just had a major asthma attack. It's not genetic, doesn't run in our family. It's absolutely environmental. It's up every 2 hours, hooking him up to a breathing apparatus through the night to make sure he stayed alive. And that's directly attributable to air quality. And that's something that these refineries and these is one factor in that sort of thing. So, this is a really important fight for me on a personal level, as well as, what I think is best for the environment and for the world. So I kind of came to this, to Phillips 66, because I've been tracking some of the tar sands stuff that's happening along the West Coast. So I want to give a little background on that. Tar sands, mainly right now produced in Canada, although there's some deposits in the U.S. that are sort of starting to become accessible. Tar sands oil produces something called bitumen, which is a dense, highly viscous petroleum. It's found in clay and sand deposits, and it's chemically distinct from conventional oil. Then those distinctions make it the dirtiest, most climate-intensive, and most polluting form of oil that we produce right now. It contains large amounts of benzene, toluene, ethylbenzene, xylenes. These are known as BTEX compounds, and other heavy metals such as lead. State and federal toxic emissions inventories list all of those. So it should be something that the feds are tracking. It should be something that the state is tracking as air pollutants known to cause health impacts, serious health impacts. Bitumen contains 100 times more copper, 21 times more vanadium, 11 times more sulfur, 6 times more nitrogen, 11 times more nickel, and 5 times more lead than conventional heavy crude oil. So this is not just another crude that they're contemplating bringing in. This is not just another type of oil. This is something a lot more serious. It's going to have more serious health impacts, and it's going to have more serious environmental impacts. In order to transport it, they have to dilute it. Bitumen is a recalcitrant and immobile crude oil. It requires the addition of diluents. So when you dilute it, they call it dilbit. In order to get it through unheated transmission lines, pipelines, they have to dilute it. Usually they use very light petroleum products, natural gas products in order to do that. The key differences between bitumen and regular crude is its high density, viscosity, and adhesion properties. And those properties sort of dictate what happens to the bitumen when it gets loose in the environment, and it can settle to the bottom of a water body very quickly. It's very sticky, very toxic. The diluents themselves and the dilbit itself, there's a lot of different formulas, high variability between what formulas are used, and that's generally considered to be trade secret, so it's not public knowledge. Obviously, it's important that we find out what's in the dilbit in order to know how to respond if there's a spill, and know what kind of air quality impacts and water quality impacts that we're going to be facing in the event of a spill. The diluents tend to be, because they're so light, they tend to volatilize very quickly in the air. In Kalamazoo, Michigan, there was a spill of about 20,000 barrels, which is not very much. The Costco Busan spill was, I think, 53,000 barrels that spilled into San Francisco Bay. And that was considered a relatively minor spill. So 20,000 is not very much at all. That took them 5 years to clean up in the Kalamazoo River. And they still haven't figured out how to get it up off the bottom of that river. Basically, the bottom of the river is dead. Cost about $1 billion in cleanup costs, and they've just given up. Lots of air quality impacts from that spill. Lots of people reporting to the hospital. Lots of people sick. There are few effective techniques for dilbit cleanup. They have some experience in freshwater because of Kalamazoo mainly and one other spill, but in the marine environment and saltwater, they don't know what it's going to do. They don't know how fast it's going to sink. They don't know where it's going to go. They don't know how fast it's going to volatilize, what the air quality impacts are. All of that stuff is information that the public needs to know if they're going to start bringing in, hundreds more tankers into the Rodeo refinery and into the bay generally, which is another potentially cumulative impact. The reason all this is happening is because the Kinder Morgan Trans Mountain expansion project is being completed. It's a $7.4 billion pipeline that brings tar sands from the Canadian interior to Vancouver, where it can be loaded on transport, so tankers and barges. They're in their stock documents, in their publicly released funding documents, they rely on California refining capacity. They say, we're aiming at markets on the West Coast, mainly California, Washington, some in Hawaii. So, there's no secret that they're trying to ship their tar sands down here and get it refined, and afflict our communities with it. They're not going to say that. They haven't come out and said that that's what they want to do. Phillips 66 won't say it, yet. They eventually admitted it, that they were aiming to bring in tar sands down in Santa Maria, which is the other half of their refineries. They have a 200-mile pipeline that connects the refinery here to the one in Santa Maria. And for all of their government documents, those are considered to be the same facility. And they wanted to bring in crude by rail down there, and said, no, it's not going to be tar sand, not going to be Canadian tar sands, until Freedom of Information Act and the activism down there forced them to finally admit that that's what they were actually going to bring in, was the tar sands. And then their city council shut it down, and they're involved in a lawsuit right now to overturn that. So that's another potential cumulative impact, is that there might end up being tar sands coming through that pipeline to this refinery, in addition to the tar sands coming in through the marine terminal. So it's another thing that's not taken into account in the actual project proposal. There's a whole list of right now their project just says they want to increase the number of ships coming in, that they're not going to change the feedstock, they're not going to change the type of oil they're refining, any of that. But the truth is that there are a number of connected projects that they haven't talked about that really should be evaluated, and that's something that they're supposed to do in their EIR during the CEQA process. But it makes it a lot easier for them if they don't have to evaluate those environmental impacts, cumulatively. There is some just one quick note before I talk more about the terminal expansion. There is some California legislation, and there's some California legislators who are looking at this. We had a bill last year, or last session. The session's not quite over yet, but with Senator Wiener from San Francisco, and he sponsored legislation, Senate Bill 709, that would have tried to increase safety measures for tar sands that was coming down from Canada, and that didn't make it out of the Appropriations Committee. So that is a potential avenue, and I encourage everybody, of course, to contact their legislators, our state legislators as well, because that's a potential path to stopping some of these things, is to increase the safety requirements, either do that as a backdoor, as a way to say, increase the marginal cost to the point where it's not really worth it to them to bring this stuff in anymore, and just to make us all safer, obviously. And if the air board isn't accessible enough, then legislation is a viable option, and we're going to keep exploring that. That legislation that we sponsored was focused on oil spill contingency plans and the Office of Spill Prevention and Recovery, which is the California Department of Fish and Wildlife section that deals with oil spills cleanups, saving the wildlife that's affected, all that kind of stuff. And they, as a result of this bill, I got a chance to talk to them, and they were kind of a little bit head in the sand, like, we don't know what you're talking about. It seems like there's plenty of response technology in place. We don't think that there's going to be a problem with more coming in. There's not very much coming in right now, so why should we worry about it? So I think it's really important to sort of raise that awareness, and that's sort of what something Baykeeper is trying to do right now, is really talk to them and try to get some studies, see where the data gaps are, see where the response gaps are, try to figure out what we need to do in case of a spill. That's what Baykeeper is kind of focused on, protecting the bay, obviously. So we're focused on in the event of a spill, but I think that's an important piece, and some of our coalition partners are looking at some of the other impacts too, and I think we're going to look at everything. But our expertise is definitely in spill and spill prevention. The marine terminal expansion, they want to increase their offloading limit by 78,000 barrels per day. As I said before, 20,000 barrels are what spilled in the Kalamazoo River. Took 5 years, $1 billion, right? They want to increase it to 78,000 barrels a day. Now that's an average over a whole year. So you can imagine they could do hundreds of thousands of barrels in a day, and then go a couple days without doing it. So it really could add up, and they can bring in some really big tankers and deal with some really high volumes that are quite dangerous. They want to increase it by 76 ships per year, their current permit. So go from 59 to 135 ships per year. So that's more than doubling what they currently have, what's currently coming in, and all the associated impacts you have with that, air quality impacts from the ships, from the burning diesel or ship fuel, as well as the risks you get from spills. The air quality impacts feel like they're likely to backslide. It seems like things are going to get worse if this goes through, because of the unique chemical composition of bitumen. Means that there's a presence of large quantities of volatile diluents, as I was saying before. Those contain high levels of VOCs, TACs, and HAPs, which is just those volatile compounds that they use to dilute the bitumen. That those are really toxic. So when released, they can cause significant health and air quality impacts. That composition, and then what I was talking about before, all the heavy metals, that really affects emissions. The amount and composition of sulfur in the crude determines the amount of sulfur dioxide that is emitted, and as well as the odoriferous hydrogen sulfide and metacaptans that will be emitted. Those are all the things that make it stink and that give kids asthma and that cause cancer and all the other shit. Other significant impacts: energy consumption, air emissions, toxic pollutant releases, flaring, catastrophic incident risks. All of those depend on the quality of the crude. So you're looking at a much more corrosive product. I think there was a Chevron, the 2012 fire at Chevron Richmond, which you can directly trace to this type of crude oil, this sort of more corrosive type of crude oil. It's just their pipes and their equipment corroded at a much faster rate than they expected, and that caused a really catastrophic fire. Phillips 66 has had 87 air quality violations between 2010 and 2014, so not a great record as far as somebody who you want to increase the amount that they're processing. That's definitely something to mention if you're talking to representatives of some kind. As far as overall impacts, we said there's about 76 more ships coming into Rodeo, but overall on the West Coast, you're looking at about 2,000 additional ships per year. And that, a good percentage of that, maybe 30 or 40% of that is going to come to the Bay Area. A lot's going to go to Long Beach too. Some goes to Washington, but a good percentage of that's going to end up coming right into the Bay. So you're looking at, close to 1,000 extra ships a year. 76 here, but they could ask for another terminal expansion in a little while, and in a couple of years too. That all goes to what they're doing, which is called piecemealing, which means that they're taking a lot of different projects, putting them together, getting them approved one at a time in separate places, so they don't have to look at all the environmental impacts of each of those projects when they're taken cumulatively, when they're taken all together. So they had a previous marine terminal expansion in 2013. They had an expansion of their carbon plant operations. This crude by rail terminal that I mentioned down in Santa Maria. They have a propane recovery project that includes propane and butane, which are both diluents for tar sands. All of these projects have been separately authorized and separately permitted, so they're avoiding looking at what the overall impacts of changing their feedstock over to tar sands is going to be. I haven't worked with BACMed a lot. I know there was a meeting on September 20th, which was a good showing. Lots of people turned out. Hopefully some of you were there, probably. But there's a real risk that this permit revision will be treated as a ministerial matter, which means that they're just going to have the executive make the decision. And it'll never be brought before the board of directors for a vote. It'll never have a public hearing. That's something that as a grassroots group, it's really important to push on. You really need to say, listen, we're citizens, we're going to be affected, and we need to have our voices heard. That's due process. We're going to have our rights affected, and we're going to have our health affected. We deserve a hearing, and that's a principle of this country. Is that if the government's going to do something that's going to impact you, you need to have a hearing, and that point needs to be made to the board of directors. The Air District decision maker is the executive officer. We had close to 20,000 comments opposing the project from up and down the West Coast already, so there should be a good push. The problem is that they look like they're slowing things way down. They're preparing an EIR, but they're suggesting it could take you 9 months before the draft EIR is ready. They'll probably push that back a little bit more even than that. Once the draft is ready, then we'll do comments. Our coalition partners will do comments, and then they'll have to respond to all those comments and come up with a final EIR. So you're looking at another equal amount of time for them to do that potentially. So they're one of their techniques is they just keep kicking the ball a little further down the field and hope that people fall asleep on it. Hope that people stop paying attention, stop complaining, stop forget that they're even doing it. That's and it's a tough tactic because we all have lives and it's hard to keep up that pressure. But if you can just do a little something once a week or once a month and just have a day you set aside to do something like that. My wife has been really good at that. She has a group that she gets together with, and they just have like a letter writing campaign, and like one person like does all the labels, and one person gets the stamps together and gets the postcards together, and they just have something to get together and hang out with your friends. It's fun to hang out with like-minded people and talk about issues, and you can include this just every so often and have a list of who you need to contact. I think that's that can be really effective. Like I said, I think there's some potential for state action. So I think it's really important to talk to your state rep and your state senators and say this is an important issue, and especially the tar sands part of it. California supply is dropping drastically. California used to produce a lot of heavy crude. That's why a lot of the refining capacity is here in California. All our oil wells are dropping drastically. There's you look at the curve for California production and it's going way down. So all those refineries are looking for somewhere else to get their oil from. Right now that's Saudi Arabia, that's Venezuela, South America, Mexico. They want to open up Canada as a major supplier. And if we can get that marginal cost up for that tar sands, then we can maybe push that off and keep the expansion, the refinery expansion. Like that, it just blows my mind that anyone's even considering expanding refineries at this point in history. But it's always going to be a fight, and we've got to keep pushing on that. Let's see, I'm sure you guys are all familiar with the spill incident that happened in 2016. From what I hear, the BACMed staff has shown no indication that spill incident qualifies as evidence that oil spills in the marine environment are an air pollution risk. It's an opportunity to organize, an opportunity to complain. You got to tell that board of directors at BACMed to get their heads out of their wares, because 120 people went to the hospital here in Vallejo, 1,400 odor complaints. The whole town was forced to shelter in place. And how is that not an air quality impact? It's absurd. Yeah, close your windows. But it doesn't, don't go anywhere. Yeah, it doesn't help.
Still come through the door and I can taste it.
Yeah. We did a Freedom of Information Act request, and we're trying to get as much information about that incident as we can. Baykeeper's investigation so far, on the 20th, September 20th, 2016, 8:40 p.m. Spill was reported to the Office of Spill Prevention and Recovery by Blue and Gold Fleet Senior Captain Chuck Ellis. He described the spill as a very pungent odor like bunker fuel in the atmosphere. Further described the odor as unbearable. He was captaining a ship at the time, so out on the water. At the time of the report, the Yamuna Spirit was in the process of discharging between 3,000 and 6,000 barrels of Arab extra light crude to the Phillips 66 refinery terminal. So this is not a crude oil that contained the diluents that we're really concerned about and that sickened people around the Kalamazoo River. And it still had such a major impact on Vallejo. The next day, while the transfer was still ongoing, they didn't stop the transfer. the Phillips 66 employee reported that there was a sheen. So, and security tape shows that sheen. The Coast Guard analysis of that substance found the water matched the light Arabian crude that was being transferred from the tanker. So on that basis, the Coast Guard assessed fines, but Phillips 66 has never accepted responsibility, nor has the owner of the tanker. Basically, I mean, what I understand of their logic is, well, we checked everything. We checked all our pipes, we checked all our tubes, all our seals, we checked the ship, can't find where the leak went, so it can't be our fault. Meanwhile, you got a major spill, right? I'm pretty much done, so if you want to ask questions, go right ahead.
I want to know. Hold on.
Okay. Oh, we got mics for everybody.
So we have mics.
I want to know if there's a way to increase the fines for not only polluting us, but trying to get away with it. Because they showed by their not accepting responsibility that they don't give a crap about the people in this town. And I can tell you, shelter in place doesn't work when you come home at 8 o'clock at night and all your windows have been open all day.
It's hot.
What do? You shut your windows and you shut the stink in with you in your house?
Yeah.
It's not a real thing.
No, it's what you say when you have no other answer.
And
If the air is poison to breathe, what else are you going to tell people?
I also question this 120 people went to the hospital. They had to turn people away because they were full. So I think there's actually more people who tried to go to the hospital who were sent to Fairfield and other places because our hospitals here were overflowing. So it was actually more people than that.
I think that's a great suggestion as far as fines, and that's something that I think the best way to do it might be to go through legislation and try to go through the California legislature, because I don't think BACMed I don't think they're interested in a major regulatory revision, which is I think what that would take, and they'd have to look at their authorizing legislation and see what was, what kind of fines were permitted and what the basis of that was. Whereas, legislation you could do, in a year or under a year, you could have an instruction to the agency to reassess the fines, and on a certain, and you could tell them to do it however you wanted. And I think that's a great idea. I think that's something you should suggest to your state representative and your state senator. And it's something I'll keep in mind when I'm talking with Senator Wiener. We've got an ongoing discussion of how to progress with this legislation and try to increase safety for in consideration of the tar sands that are coming in. So I think that's a great idea. Yeah.
They had another spill recently, only a few weeks ago, a pinhole leak in a transfer pipe, which means corrosion.
Right.
They're not operating currently properly, and they're intending to increase the operation. They don't have any monitoring for air quality on the wharf at all. Currently, there's a mandate for them to build a fence line system by 2018. And their draft plan was released a couple of weeks ago. We have another 30 days roughly to comment on it. And they have no monitoring for the entire side of the refinery towards Vallejo, no monitoring on the wharf whatsoever, no intent to monitor any of that whatsoever.
Yeah.
And we've got a short period of time. Really, they're not operating properly now, so considering an expansion is just ridiculous.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Yeah, I'm right with that.
Hello, my name is Seamus Thornton, and I am a Vallejo resident for the last 17 years. First of all, I wanted to say I'm sorry to hear about your son's asthma attack. And when I was young, I had a friend who had an asthma attack, and it's pretty terrifying when they can't breathe. First, a comment. You mentioned the Kalamazoo River spill. Is that the spill that John Bollenbaugh is an activist regarding? It was an Enbridge spill.
Yeah.
So he has a website called helppa.org where he's made videos. He was an Enbridge employee who was hired ordered to throw dirt over the spill. It's still there. he goes around digging up little holes 2 feet deep. It's still there. So this really horrendously toxic stuff, they've got fish with lesions. Anyway, you should go to that website, helppa.org, and watch his video. And he explains some stuff that'll really rock your world. So I'm thinking that you're a lawyer. Is there any possibility that we can have a class action lawsuit representing the 120 people who were sent to the hospital and who were adversely harmed by this? If they did analysis on that oil and we can fingerprint it to the oil that was being processed, you know, we can pursue a case against and make them think twice. There needs to be legal punishments for the kind of behavior they're engaged in, and we need to prove, like they've committed a crime, they won't admit it, so we need to prove it and stick it to them because we need to raise the cost of their misbehavior.
Mm-hmm.
As a lawyer, can you do that?
I personally, it's not my field of law. I think you'd want someone who is versed in tort and nuisance law. And I don't think a class action would probably be the way to go unless you're trying to represent the whole town, which I guess you could do that as a class action. But if you just want to represent the people who went to the hospital that day, it'd be easier just to get just those people, unless you couldn't round them up. But if you could round them up, that'd be the easiest way to go. And then the problem would be you're just going after specific damages. So you'd have to try to, document what those damages were, hospital costs and things like that. And it gets a little tricky, but there might be a plaintiff's attorney who's interested in doing something like that. That's the kind of thing that I think attorneys do for on a contingency. If they think that there's a good enough claim, and Phillips has deep pockets. So the problem is attributing causation, right? You have to say that the people who were injured as a direct result of some kind of negligence on the part of Phillips 66, and that's probably what would steer a plaintiff's attorney away from that. That would require a lot of experts, a lot of upfront cost. So it'd be hard to round that up, but it's possible somebody would be interested in that, and I wouldn't close the book on that possibility. It's not the way that Baykeeper operates, though. It's
Typically, a large law firm won't do that sort of a suit because of the necessity of proof.
The upfront cost, yeah.
Small claims court, you can put a nuisance suit against. In a small claims court, you can actually place a nuisance suit for. I think they raised the amount to somewhere around $10,000, and 1,000 people complaining at $10,000 apiece starts to look like real money.
Sure, you could try to do something like that. The thing with small claims court is, they have plenty of lawyers and they don't mind paying them. So you can always remove a case from small claims court to regular court. That's always an option. It only stays in a small claims court where both parties want it to stay in a small claims court. So, the first tactic that occurs to me that they might do would be to try to move it to regular court, and then you'd need an attorney, and your costs you wouldn't be able to do it, But if you're just trying to bleed them a little bit, and employ some lawyers on their side, could do that. I don't know how effective that would be, though. That's my initial take at it. Yeah, like I said, not something I'm super familiar with. The only other thing I had on here was that Nate had mentioned the Mare Island dry dock, so that we can hear a little bit more about that. I mean, that could happen afterwards too, if you guys would rather. But yeah, go ahead.
Carol has a question.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just need to pass a little time.
Hey.
Hi, thank you.
Sure.
I would like to write letters, as you suggested, and I want to know where could I get a model, because I don't have the vocabulary to write the kind of letter that's needed. So I would like a model and the addresses to whom this letter should be addressed. That would be a great help for me, maybe others as well.
As far as a model, we have our comments on the on the marine terminal expansion permit that was put together by Baykeeper, as well as Friends of the Earth, Communities for a Better Environment, Stand, .Earth, Sierra Club, and Center for Biological Diversity. And like I said, I think that's available online through our web pages. I don't have that. I don't have like a site. I think if you go to Baykeeper's site as part of our e-news, we'll have some link to that. I also have a copy here. I'm happy to give you the copy if you want to see that. As far as addresses, it depends on where you want to focus. Like I said, I think we need to get the board of directors of the BACMed to pay attention to this. I think that they would like to sweep it under the rug and just let it be an executive decision instead of having an actual hearing and having a vote themselves on it. So that could be a direction to go. I think Vallejo mayor and some of the city council have proven to be receptive and willing to be a voice for you guys. I've heard some good things coming out of that office. So letters to them might encourage them to keep going. And like I said, you're a state senator and state representative. And then the other thing that I didn't mention yet that might be helpful is to put some pressure on the water board for San Francisco Bay, the San Francisco Bay Regional Water Quality Control Board. I think that they need to evaluate the potential for water quality impacts from the spill. I think they need to evaluate the potential for their pollutant discharge permit violations if they change the feedstock, for changes in that, for the effluent, the pollutant discharges that they're going to put out if they start refining tar sands. And I think they should be involved in this permit process. It's ridiculous that an air board is who's issuing a permit for this, which is essentially a refinery expansion. So that's another agency that you could try to pursue. But I'm sorry, we don't have a list of addresses, and I don't have that set up. I think Communities for a Better Environment is a really good group for the community organizing. They come out a lot, and they have dedicated organizers who prepare citizen letters and have lists of addresses and stuff like that too. And I know they're really involved with this issue. Yeah, go ahead.
I'll let you fresh air Vallejo has a list.
Yeah.
I have a list
And
of
Nate has a list.
the BACMed board members' email addresses that I can get to you, Carol.
Post that on our Facebook page. I'll post it tomorrow.
Yeah.
And who's sympathetic with the original?
Yeah. Oh, great. That's great.
So when you say they want to make an executive decision and not put it to a vote of the board, does that mean staff makes the decision or administrative decision?
Their executive, I think their executive director is empowered to make these sort of permitting decisions, and the board doesn't have to vote on it. But the board can decide to vote on it. That's my understanding. I haven't. Maybe one of you knows the answer to that better than I do.
This question feels a little naive, but we do have, as you mentioned, some city council members and even some of the the school district members that are concerned about these issues because they have a school right overlooking the bluff, pretty close to the refinery and the cement plant. But if we can get those people to pass a resolution or something to that extent, how much influence does that have? We're a care community. We're trying to get recognized as a downwinder. I think most people in Vallejo don't even realize the impacts that we're in the refinery corridor and the impacts, but we're trying to bring awareness. So is that effective if it's a citywide type resolution? We have people that are good at writing local legislation and bringing it to our entities.
I would think it would be effective. When I've reviewed EIRs in the past, there's definitely a difference in the way they respond to other governmental entities compared to how they respond to like an environmental group or to general citizen comments. So I would think that would be an effective way. Yeah, I mean, you're basically trying to find leverage to make this board of directors pay attention, you know, and they'll pay attention if cities are, you know, you have to look at who's on this board, you know. Air district, yeah, yeah. I think that's a great idea.
To show how far down the totem pole Vallejo really is, when they were doing scoping sessions for the wharf expansion, they didn't even tend to have one.
Yeah, but you guys showed up to,
Oh,
you know, I know Nate and Ken showed up to, and you were there too. Yeah.
It was a very well attended hearing.
Yeah, it was, and that was directly a result of the pressure that you guys put on them, and I think that's laudable.
I have a very maybe out of this world question, but looking at the applications of the Phillips 66, I know you're analyzing them. Are they taking into account climate change, the water rise, and stuff like that?
That's stuff that they need to take into account once they issue the draft EIR. We'll have a better sense, but I haven't actually seen the application yet. It's not public as far as I know. We have Freedom of Information Act requests and Public Records Act requests out for that. And
with regards to conversations about this Phillips 66, is that taken into account? Climate change, sea rise, and stuff like that?
I think they're not going to. I think they're going to say there's no change and they're not applying for a permit to change the feedstock. They're not going to expand the marine terminal. They say they can accommodate all these ships with no extra equipment. So they're just saying, no, we're just leaving everything the way it is. We're just going to bring more ships in. You know, nothing else is going to change. But I mean, it's a ridiculous argument. You're making a change. You're bringing in more ships, then you should take into account what risk there is of those ships, you know, being affected by sea level rise and what risk. No, we're talking about Rodeo. There's a Rodeo Phillips 66 refinery, and they want to bring in a lot more ships in there, bringing in more crude oil to refine, and you know, all that air pollution will end up here. Yeah, go ahead. Okay, Ken.
Thank you, Ben, for coming here. A question is about you mentioned the chemical composition of the crude might be changed. I asked a question to BAQMD about this specific question, and what the answer given to me was, we monitor at the chimney. So, so basically, from their point of view, is even though they might have a different type of crew coming in, but if we can monitor their exhaust at the chimney, then they seems to indicate that they have control. So I wonder what's your thought about that.
Those are the kind of answers that they're going to have, and that's what's going to be in their draft EIR. They're going to say, you know, there's not going to, you know, there's no increase in permitted levels. You know, we monitor the chimney. You know, chimney is not the only place where you're getting emissions, right? I mean, this spill, for instance, that sickened everybody, that didn't come out of a chimney. And the other point I would make in response to that is that they need to look at what current feedstocks and production levels are at right now and compare that to what they would be, not at what the permitted levels are. So I think when they say they're monitoring the chimney, what they're going to say is, you know, we're not going to go over what our permitted levels of you know, air pollutants are, but they're not going to look at what that change, what the difference is in the change in feedstock is actually going to be in terms of emissions. They're only looking at what their permitted level is. So if they're below their permitted level, they're going to go right up to that as far as all those criteria pollutants are. And I'm not totally familiar with what exactly they're monitoring for and what techniques they use and how effective that is. All that should be reviewed as well to make sure that what they're monitoring for actually reflects the kind of pollutants that might be present with a change in feedstock, as well as what's present with the normal crude that they refine now.
As you, Jake, as you increase the volatility of the feedstock oil, and you put that in the tanks with the seals around the top of the tanks that leak and roll, you're increasing the fugitive emissions, just the emissions that escape normal operations. And you may not realize how many tons, I mean, there's thousands of tons of fugitive emissions coming off the plants per year. And the seals aren't going to be changed to a capped tank. These are increased fugitive emissions associated with a feedstock change and not coming out the smokestack, leaking out of every joint they've got.
I remember reading there were a bunch of emissions in Houston as a result of the flooding that they had there. As their seals and their tanks couldn't support that much rain. So, I don't know what effect our recent rains had, but that could be another issue as well. But yeah, thank you.
This is sort of an apocalyptic type question, and it's probably not very realistic. But are tanker exposed? Is tar sands? Is it more volatile? And how frequent, if ever, are tanker explosions? And we're within a mile and a half, and it seems like that we would even experience the impacts. But is that any way to bring awareness, or is it just an implausible thing? I don't know how to, it worked for LNG to say there was concentric rings.
Yeah.
It was going to take out City Hall. We're just having trouble waking up enough people.
That's something to think about. I haven't heard about tanker explosions, but they do talk about that for rail cars, right? I have a video. Yeah, so.
But if it's not realistic, I'm not going to.
I know it was a big deal for the trains that were going through communities. They were really worried about those exploding. I think maybe the problem is a lot of the train cars were single walled, and they were converted from other uses. I think that maybe the safety stuff that they have in place for oil tankers, they all have to be double holed, for instance. Maybe that reduces the possibility, but it seems if it would work for trains, I don't know why it would be less safe. I know there are increased risks of fires and explosions in the refineries when they're using this stuff. Yeah.
I think they predicted 100, that a train would derail in the crude by rail, one in every 111 years, and actually there's been, remember that article, 6 in the last 5 years? So they don't estimate, right?
When we were flooding the cogen plants in Crockett, they brought in their experts on train derailment. We forced them to bury an ammonia tank underground instead of having it above ground, because it was right next to the train tracks. And I moved up to the woods for about 3 years. The day I moved back to town, there was a shelter-in-place siren because there was a train derailment, and it swept right over top of the underground tank. The newspaper the next morning didn't say 1,000 people didn't die. They basically had a little byline that there was a little inconsequential train derailment. But you can't let little things like that slide, because that saved lives. Nobody realized it, but it saved lives.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, where we are right now is a care community, the zip code 94590.
Yeah.
And are you aware of any special treatment that BACMed has for care communities, or is this just propaganda? Or
I don't know. I'm not as familiar enough with BACMed and with air quality stuff in general, but someone else might know the answer to that question.
Yeah, because we need to press them on.
Yeah.
Now that we are a care community, what's next?
Yeah.
Talk about it.
Yeah. Well, they don't really want to talk about Vallejo at all for this marine terminal expansion. That's why they only had the scoping comment. Scoping meeting in Rodeo, in Hercules. Mm-hmm. So we need to keep pushing them and say that the impacts are a lot wider, and that
By some accounts, 70% of the wind coming from there hits our shores here.
Yeah.
The wind rose from there does have 70% of the wind direction is directly at Vallejo.
Yeah.
And
so I think
even the smelter, which was on that site, covered the hillsides over here, so that if you grazed your horse in Glen Cove area for 30 days, there was a 100% death rate because of the heavy metals, the lead and arsenic. So, that where the wind's going. we got our nose up there as well.
Yeah. So it seems really important to educate your neighbors and other people in the city, because it's coming here and people don't necessarily know it.
So I have a question. In terms of working with BACMed, is this a new thing for Baykeeper? Are you focused on air quality for this particular fight against Phillips 66? Or are you staying with the water quality as the issue?
That's our expertise, is really the water quality. So, and I'm learning a lot about the air quality issues, and some of our partners, that's really their focus. So, to the extent that I can use somebody else's expertise and try to win an argument that way, I'm absolutely going to do it. But our mission is really water quality, and I think it's important to have these partnerships and to learn about it. But there's also an efficiency of effort, and I think it's important that the people who are good at the air quality stuff, we get them involved in the fight, and I'll cover the water quality stuff and let them tell me what the best fight is for the air quality stuff. Yeah.
This question has nothing to do with Phillips, but our fight right now is against the proposed cement plant.
Yeah.
And they're planning to import slag from Asia, and it's a very high pH material. I think it's above 12.
Mm-hmm.
Falling in the water as fugitive, will that have an impact on the water or on the fish, or that
Yeah,
much?
it certainly could, and that's we have a stormwater campaign, and we follow a lot of the permitting for sites like that, and we really try to watchdog what's going in the water as a result of those sort of industrial operations, and that's how we did comment on the ORChem. We partnered with Sierra Club to comment on the ORChem expansion.
Yes. So
and
you
we're
saw the
following. Jason Flanders, I think, is representing some
Jason.
groups here. He used to be a Baykeeper at San Francisco
really?
Baykeeper too. So we're
So
he's
he saw
a good
the
friend. Yeah.
18-inch deep trench and plant some tulies to. That's basically
to get us interested. No, we're definitely following what's happening with the ORChem plant, but primarily we were concerned that they might use it as a coal terminal. They might expand it from just because they want to make a deep water terminal there, and we were worried that there's a lot of Utah coal that's got nowhere to go. So we wanted to like have that issue, front and center. But we'll also follow permitting, and that's I'm interested in the Mare Island stuff too. If there's industrial pollution going in the bay from there, then that's something we should take a look at. But I want to hear from you guys about that.
All these refineries in the Bay Area, there's 5 of them. When it rains,
There's more, yeah.
or when
6.
they're cleaning up their equipment, where does that water go to? When they're cleaning their equipment, or when it rains real hard, on the refineries, the pipes and stuff that have oil and stuff on them, and where does that water go to?
You tell me. Where do you think it goes?
In the Bay.
It goes in the bay, yeah.
Because I worked at Chevron, and I went years ago. I went to the back of Chevron. And they had this huge pipe. It was almost big enough for you to walk through it, and this stuff was coming. I guess it was from the refinery going out into these. They call them whole drying ponds, and that stuff sat there and dries it. Well, what do they do with it?
Well, a lot of it does go in the bay. I think you're right. But there are permits. They're supposed to measure. They're supposed to test everything that goes in. They have a stormwater permit that they're supposed to follow, and that's something that we monitor and that we have sued when they violated it. Yeah.
In that water.
Yeah, but that's another avenue that we follow, and that we try to. That's another way that there's the coal facility at Levin in Richmond. Port of Richmond, we sued on that basis, and we got them to institute a whole bunch of safety measures. Now they have to Now they have to use sprinkler systems to wet down the coal so the wind doesn't blow it in. They have to use barrier systems, and they have to use solid pipes for their conveyor belts for the coal and all that stuff. That's based on a lawsuit that we did. So we do look at those sorts of issues where we can, it's a question of manpower. There's 3 attorneys at Baykeeper, and now we have 2 scientists. A long time we only had 1 scientist. So, we get out and do as much testing as we can, but we rely a lot on what the facilities themselves, the testing the facilities themselves do. Then we also rely on people, sending us photos. And if you see something going in the bay, give us a call. We've got a hotline number, and we want to know about it.
You said you were following the Mare Island Dry Dock.
No, Nate just told me about it. So
Oh, okay.
I want to hear about it a little bit from you if anybody knows about it.
I think Ken can explain more, but yeah, we're worried about what's going in the water, not only the air, but in the water. And we know San Francisco is closed, so we get that much more traffic 24/7.
It's the largest facility, yeah.
Yeah, Ken may want to say more. Let me give him.
Thanks, Ken.
Thank you. As far as I know, I think in San Francisco they used to have a floating dock, and actually I think they got fined because Baykeeper was kind of monitoring some of the activity there, and they violated the rule. So I was wondering if you can share what you know about that case, and because as you know, like for a dry dock operation, they both have air pollution part and the water. But for us, the most obvious visible one is the air one, and also we can breathe, and people actually had reacted to the polluted air. Mm-hmm. So, but I'm sure so I wanted to know if you can share what was the problem at San Francisco dock or the ship repair, so we can be aware of the type of problem we might also have here. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
I'm not familiar with the San Francisco dry dock case. Our staff scientist, his name's Ian Wren, and he just commented on the permit for a dry dock. There's a general permit that under the Clean Water Act that all dry docks in California have to follow. That's the largest one in the Bay Area, and I think his impression was that there were some problems there, but we're not aware of specifically what it is. Generally speaking, when they sandblast the hull of a ship or something like that, none of that stuff is supposed to go in the water. I think that's sort of part of their permit. So anything that you guys are breathing in, I think, is also going in the water. It's not, that stuff doesn't just stay in the air. It ends up in the water too. So anything that you have on stuff that's coming out of that dry dock is probably stuff that's also going in the water and that could be used in a.
Yeah. For example, like if we also suspect that, but I guess we don't know how to go about it. For example, like as you described, we also suspect that's the case. So if we want to present a case and ask Baykeeper to help us, what type of thing we need to provide to you?
Any evidence you have of stuff going in the water. So if you have these suspicions, if you have any photos of debris or clouds of dust coming off the dry dock, anytime they're doing work, it seems like that would be like there'd be debris or clouds of dust. If you think it's going into the air, then it's probably also going in the water. So those kinds of photos, I remember there was a smaller facility. I remember someone at Baykeeper was telling me about that. They would, we went by in our boat and we saw them just basically just hosing off all the paint chips and all the crap, just hosing it right into the bay. And that kind of, if you have a photo of that or a video of that, that kind of stuff is really helpful, and that's something we can look at. Yeah.
Also, I heard we have some people, local people, they say they used to work with Baykeeper as a senior investigator or something of that nature, but as a citizen. Mm-hmm. So if Baykeeper takes on a case, what usually is the process it goes through to, for example, investigate and collect information? Or does Baykeeper working with the citizen in investigation or things like that?
Yeah, we would. We definitely work with citizens and sort of gathering information about what kind of pollution is happening around the bay. That's something that's really important to us. As far as the process, we're pretty familiar. I'm not personally, but one of the other attorneys and, like I said, our staff scientist is pretty familiar with the dry dock permit. So what we do is we'd evaluate what kind of evidence that we had and compare it with what the permit requirements are. And if there was an obvious violation of the permit, then we take it to our team and then take it to our board of directors and say that there's an obvious violation of this permit, and we'd like to file suit against them. And generally we get approval for that. As far as working with the community with that evidence gathering and stuff, there are like chain of custody issues, and you need to sort of be prepared to sign something saying I was there, and this is a true and valid photograph of what happened, and it's not terribly onerous, but it's you could get probably a case like that would settle. Probably there would be a series of best management practices that we would be looking at. We'd be looking at like how can they reduce their pollution that's going into the bay. What can they do to make it better? We wouldn't. We're not looking to shut down all the dry docks around San Francisco. We know that this is a functioning port. We know that ships need to be fixed, and we're not looking to shut everything down. But we do want to, eliminate the pollution that's coming from that industry into the bay. And so I think there's a series of practices, and that's something our scientist is really familiar with. And so no more hosing stuff off into the bay. No more, if you're going to sandblast, you have to put up a cover of some kind, or tarp, something that encloses that air so that the dust and debris doesn't get blown off into the air and end up in the bay. Maybe there's other practices that they can use other than sandblasting that would reduce the amount of air pollution, the amount of water pollution. We'd look at all those things, and then we'd go to the owner and we'd say, listen, this is the list of things that we think you need to do, and then we'd also look at what damage we think has already been done to the community and what's been done to the bay, and we try to get a what's called a supplemental environmental project or program. And that's basically just a chunk of money that goes to preferably a local organization that can do something to remediate some of the damage that's been done. So like a Parks Foundation, or there are different foundations that we work with to try to figure out some of the best use for that settlement money. Yeah.
I'll let Jimmy go first.
I just have a question about ships in general, bulk carriers.
Mm-hmm.
They carry, for example, grain to Asia. They come back with slag, which is an industrial waste. What do they do when they clean the hold? Do they hold the water? Because I know they can discharge it in the bay. So what's what they do, the ships, when they wash down the toxic materials, because they're going to carry grain, and these are bulk carriers, so they're not in bags or whatever.
Yeah. Well, they're not supposed to dump anything in the bay when they're cleaning out stuff. A lot of times, I think what they'll do, there's not really very many restrictions in international waters. So if there's something they can do out in international waters, they'll probably do it there.
So they'll just kind of hold on the hold. I mean,
but it's if they're offloading here and they want to unload, they want to load up here. It doesn't make any sense for them to go 3 miles or however many miles it is. 3 miles is the state. I forget what this federal is. 15 miles offshore. So
if they unload the toxic stuff here, then they go to Stockton to load the grain, or to Sacramento. In the meantime, it's in the bilge. So
they need to have some sort of treatment for whatever is in there. And if if they don't, and we can catch them at it, then we can try to do something about it.
So run your bilge pump at night when nobody's watching.
A lot of that happens. This is that's why port towns have a reputation for a reason. A lot of these ships come in and they get out as fast as they can, and they don't want to get caught. We had a patrol out, and we saw a ship discharging something. We didn't know what it was. It was white and frothy and weird looking, and so we drove up and took a little sample and sent it to the lab for analysis. They stopped discharging. As soon as they saw us there, they got scared and stopped discharging. Sent to the lab for analysis, and then we're connected to the district attorney here, and they were real interested in seeing what the results of our samples were, and they're tracking the ship to try to figure out where it was, so they could next time it came to port, they could assess a fine or impound or do whatever it was they do. So that's what we would try to do if we could find some evidence of that. We need to be able to take a water sample though in order and send that to the lab. So we need to get our boat out there. Yeah, sure.
Don't the ships have a place where they can go and get their boats cleaned and then come back to the water? There's businesses like that.
Yeah, there's legal ways to do it, and there's ways that all their wash water should be treated. And
Yeah. Okay, thank you guys for letting me stay.
sure thing. Thanks for coming. Haney.
So, following on that, you were saying you would need a water sample? Because one of the samples that we've collected from the dry dock, or that may be connected to the dry dock, are dust samples of dust that we've collected off our car. Or also on window blinds, we have like copper-like dust. And we've done garage testing that shows the dust has a metallic element, but we don't have the scientific capability to really test it.
Yeah.
So you would need a water sample, is that correct?
I'm not sure. I really would need to talk to our scientist. I mean, the first thing that occurs to me is that there's a causality issue there. You've got dust on your car, on your blinds, and it's just hard to say exactly where that's coming from, and there's a chain of causation that you need to be able to draw between what's happening at the dry dock and what happens at your house. So that's one thing about the water sample is that you can observe, that something's happening, and then you can take a sample right there, and then you can say in court, I saw this dust going in the water, and I took the sample right when I saw that dust going in the water, and then we have a lab that we use that has a good reputation, and the court would.
So if we did have a water sample, that's something that you could possibly take action on with?
It would, yeah, it would really need to be collected in a way that we could attest to that. So there's a whole process and a series of procedures and stuff. I think we used to have sort of volunteers and citizens go out and take water samples, but it requires a lot of oversight to manage those volunteers, and that's a program we've kind of dropped. But like I said, we have a boat, and we can go collect samples and stuff if we think that there's a good time and a place. If there's some, that's the kind of information I think that'd be really useful if you know something's happening at a certain time, a certain place. Or what the general practices are, and that's something we could follow up on, and that might be
even if it's the dead of night, 3 o'clock in the morning.
I've never been out on a night patrol, but I won't say it's never happened. I don't know.
Okay, because that's when they operate a lot of the time. So
really,
yeah, we watch our air monitors peak at like 3 o'clock in the morning, or.
We can hear the equipment sandblasting overnight too. I don't know if it's just quieter, but our
yeah.
monitors seem to respond.
Okay, yeah, that's interesting. Yeah.
We have, the samples we found, we just garage testing, but they have epoxy, so about 20% ferrous. We don't know. But off my car, which is on the other side. Well, yeah, in St. Vincent's.
Yeah.
I'm maybe quarter of a mile from west.
Okay.
So does anybody have any more questions for Ben? Well, I want to thank you for
thank you all
coming.
for coming. And
Thank you very much.
thanks for all the work that I know you guys do. And, keep it up. Okay, thank you.